At 2:15 a.m. The night corridor at Walter Reed Annex exploded with alarms. White light, and the scrape of boots on polished tile. The SEAL K9, listed in the file as Rex, tore free from two handlers and drove his 92-pound body toward the emergency wing. He did not bark like a frightened dog. He moved low and silent, scarred shoulders tight, eyes locked past the nurses, past the guards, straight on Commander Harlan standing near the trauma doors. A taser rose. A sedative syringe cleared its cap. Before anyone could fire, Mara Ellison stepped out from the night nurse's station. Small, exhausted, and still wearing her brother's faded field coat beneath her scrubs. Everyone saw a tired nurse walking into a kill zone. Mara saw the crescent scar on the dog's left shoulder and felt 4 years of grief stop inside her chest. The K9 charged until her hand opened, revealing a burned dog tag darkened by fire. Then she spoke, the war name erased from every report. Ghost. The animal stopped so hard, his claws shrieked against the tile. His growl vanished. His ears lifted. He smelled Daniel on her sleeve, lowered his head, and pressed his trembling muzzle into her palm. Behind Mara, Harlan went pale. And if you have ever believed a loyal K9 remembers what people try to bury. Stay with this story and subscribe, because what Ghost was guarding would bring the whole lie back into the light. 3 hours before Ghost stopped beneath Mara Ellison's open hand, Walter Reed Annex was moving through the slow violence of a military night shift. Stretchers rolled in from rain-dark parking lanes. Monitors pulsed behind curtains. Surgical teams spoke in clipped tones that made fear sound procedural. Mara moved through it all with the quiet economy of someone used to being noticed only when something went wrong. She was a contract night nurse. Small, tired, and easy for officers to look past. With sanitizer roughening her hands and her brother's faded field coat hidden beneath her scrub jacket. The coat was too warm for the hospital, but she wore it when the dead felt close. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Ellison had worn it before Kandahar, before the folded flag, before the sealed report that claimed he and his SEAL K9 had died in the same ambush. For 4 years, Mara had believed the official version because grief had left her no strength to fight a wall made of signatures. That night, while updating intake notes, she saw a restricted transport notice flash across the desk. A condemned K9 was being moved through the annex before sunrise. The file called him Rex, listed him as unstable, and marked his disposal as already approved. Mara almost closed it, until the partial chip number caught her eye. Daniel had once written Ghost's chip number on the back of a birthday card, joking that his partner deserved a place in the family records. The last 6 digits matched. Mara read them again, and the hum of the hospital seemed to fall away. At the same time, another intake alert appeared on the emergency board. A former SEAL named Jonah Vale arriving after a late-night crash near the base access road. The note was brief, almost forgettable. But Mara noticed the security flag beside his name and the request for no public log entry. In a military hospital, silence around a patient could mean protection, shame, or danger. She filed the detail in the back of her mind and followed the K9 notice instead. Because the impossible had suddenly been given a microchip number, the veterinary containment wing smelled different from the wards, colder and less forgiving. All bleach, wet concrete, steel doors, and animal fear. 2 military police officers blocked the entrance, and beyond them, Commander Victor Harlan stood with a clipboard under the security camera, calm, in a way that made mercy seem childish. Mara gave her name. her department, and the reason she had invented on the walk down. A final welfare check before the procedure. Harlan looked at her badge before he looked at her face. His expression softened only enough to dismiss her politely. To him, she was not family, not command, not evidence. She was another nurse who had mistaken a tactical problem for a living thing. Mara kept her hand in her coat pocket, thumb pressed against Daniel's burned dog tag, and listened while Harlan reduced the K9 behind the glass to risk management and paperwork. She did not argue yet. She watched. Inside the rear kennel, the dog lay under a red placard, muzzle between his paws, one torn ear angled toward the door. A handler said the name Rex, and the dog did not move. Another metal buckle snapped, and his body tightened. Then Mara shifted, and the old field coat released a faint breath of rain, desert dust, gun oil, and hospital antiseptic. The dog lifted his head. Not much. Just enough for Mara to see the crescent scar on his shoulder. The same scar Daniel had described after Ghost took shrapnel meant for him. Her knees nearly gave way. Harlan moved to block her view. But she had already seen too much. On the file tray near the door, an older assessment page sat beneath fresh red stamps. One line remained visible through the plastic sleeve. Stable under original command pattern. Someone had not treated this dog and failed. Someone had changed his name, changed his handlers, changed the rules, and then blamed him for not forgetting. When Mara asked about Ghost, Harlan's face went still. The truth had been renamed and scheduled for dawn. The alarm in the veterinary wing did not make Ghost look wild. It made everyone else look afraid. Handlers rushed the kennel with gloves, catch poles, and a black tactical harness that should have been retired years earlier. Ghost rose from the concrete like he had heard a gun cock in the dark. His body locked on the harness, not the men, and his shoulder slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Commander Harlan used that single strike like a closing argument. To the officers watching from the hall, the dog had proved the file right. To Mara, sitting just beyond the yellow line, it proved the opposite. Ghost had not lunged for a throat. He had lunged for the one object nobody wanted opened. The file lay on a stainless card under Harlan's hand. He did not need to raise his voice. The red stamps did that for him. A death order always sounds cleaner when it is written in medical language. Mara leaned far enough to see the incident summaries while a technician pretended not to notice. The first report blamed Rex for biting a handler during reassignment. The attached note showed the handler had tightened a shock collar over an old burn and repeated a name the dog had never accepted. The second report called the harness reaction unprovoked. The photograph beside it showed scissors near the thick left seam. The third blamed Ghost for destroying a kennel. The timestamp told another story. Harlan had visited that wing 12 minutes earlier, and his name had been scraped from the log, replaced with the empty phrase "Officer Review." Mara felt the pattern settle into her bones. This was not rehabilitation. This was provocation disguised as treatment. Every crisis in the file began with the same ingredients: a false name, a metal buckle, a hand reaching for the harness, or Harlan standing close enough for Ghost to smell him. The dog was not unpredictable. He was consistent in a tragic way. He protected what hurt him most, because what hurt him also carried what Daniel had left behind. A younger veterinary technician finally slid a tablet toward Mara, while Harlan argued with the hospital commander near the door. The technician's hands shook, but the screen held steady truth. A routine scan had found a buried secondary chip beneath Ghost's scar tissue. The number matched an animal declared killed in action 4 years earlier. That discovery had been entered at 1041 p.m. The euthanasia order had been advanced at 1058. 17 minutes stood between identity and execution. Mara stared at those times until they stopped being data and became motive. Down the corridor. Emergency doors opened for the patient Mara had noticed on the intake board. Jonah Vale arrived, surrounded by trauma staff. His face gray, his left sleeve cut away. Rain and blood pooling beneath the stretcher wheels. A security flag followed him like a shadow. New public log. No visitors. Protective hold, pending review. The phrase meant little to the nurses rushing him toward surgery. But Ghost heard the stretcher before he saw it. His head snapped toward the doors. His breathing changed. The animal who had fought Steel a minute earlier now strained toward the scent of burned nylon. Field dust. And a bloodline from the same war. He was not trying to escape punishment. He was trying to reach someone who smelled like the night Daniel disappeared. That was when Harlan lost patience. He ordered the harness bagged for destruction after termination and told the sedative team to stop waiting. The words were quiet, but their timing screamed. If Ghost died, the chip would become a clerical mistake. The harness would become contaminated waste, and the name Ghost would sink back into a sealed report. Mara saw the whole machine at once, not one cruel officer, but an entire system trained to confuse silence with order. The syringe cap came off. The taser lifted again. Ghost slammed the kennel, one final time. And this time the latch bent. His eyes were not on Mara. They were on Jonah disappearing into the trauma bay. Then on Harlan. Then back to the harness with the swollen seam. The 3 points formed a map only he could read. A dying witness. A lying commander. And a piece of gear everyone was suddenly desperate to burn. Mara stepped forward before fear could talk her out of it. The file had been written to make Ghost look like a danger. But there in the white glare of the hospital, with Jonah's blood on the floor and Harlan's shadow over the cart, Mara understood the truth. Ghost was not the threat in that wing. He was the last witness still alive. And everyone who knew it wanted him gone. When the latch bent, the corridor answered with the kind of silence that comes before a shot. Ghost pushed through the kennel door, not exploding into the hall the way Harlan wanted everyone to remember it, but moving with a low, broken purpose. His eyes cut from the trauma bay to Harlan, then to the harness on the rack. 3 points. 1 map. The guards saw a dog loose in a hospital. Mara saw a soldier trying to finish a mission. A taser beam slid across Ghost's ribs. The sedative team raised the syringe. Harlan stayed behind other men, careful to keep distance while giving the kind of silent permission that left no fingerprints. Mara stepped past the yellow line before anyone could stop her. She did not rush. She did not lift her hands like a handler claiming control. Daniel had taught her better in the old videos he sent from overseas. Laughing softly while Ghost watched the camera with wary golden eyes. Make yourself small. Let him choose the last step. Mara bent her knees, turned her shoulder, and opened her right hand. The burned dog tag lay in her palm, blackened along the edge, still carrying the smell of Daniel's coat. Smoke, salt, antiseptic, and desert dust trapped in metal. Ghost came closer, claws ticking against tile, breath harsh but no longer blind. He stopped 6 feet away, muscles trembling with the effort of not obeying the fear others had built into him. Mara said his war name again. Not loudly, not like an order, but like a door opening in a house he had thought burned down. Ghost. His ears lifted. The growl left him. He inhaled once, so hard the tag clicked against her skin, and the hospital fell away from his eyes. Mara saw the battlefield return. then break apart. His shoulder dropped first, then his jaw. Then the rage drained from his face and left something older beneath it. Grief with training wrapped around it, but he was not safe yet. His gaze jumped past her to the trauma doors where Jonah had vanished. Then back to Harlan. Then to the harness. The map remained. Mara understood that the name had stopped his body, but not his war. She pulled the tag closer to her mouth and remembered Daniel's last message, the one she had replayed until static became part of her loneliness. For years, she had believed the final phrase was meant to comfort her. Now Ghost stood shaking before her, and she heard it as Daniel had intended. A private stand-down pattern for the partner he knew might outlive him. Mara let the words come in Daniel's cadence. Soft, steady, with no command inside them except trust. The change moved through Ghost slowly enough for every person in the corridor to witness it. His front legs bent, his head lowered until his nose touched the burned tag. A thin sound broke from him. Not a whine, exactly. Not pain, exactly. But recognition after years of being called by the wrong name. He pressed his forehead to Mara's knee and sank to the floor. The taser stayed aimed, but nobody fired. The syringe remained ready, but no one moved. Even the alarms seemed distant now. Harlan looked smaller behind the uniforms, because the file had promised a monster, and a nurse with no rank had revealed a wounded witness. Ghost lifted his head only once. He nudged Mara's wrist toward the harness rack. Firm. Deliberate. Almost impatient. She followed his gaze to the swollen seam on the left side. The place every handler report had treated like a trigger. Suddenly, it was no longer a trigger. It was a hiding place. Mara rose slowly, keeping one hand in Ghost's fur, and walked toward the gear as the corridor watched. Ghost stayed between her and Harlan, calm as a locked door. The dog had not come back to beg for mercy. He had come back to point at the truth Daniel had stitched into war gear, carried through fire, and protected under a false name until Mara finally spoke the one word that made him remember home and who had betrayed them all. Nobody in the corridor moved after Ghost pointed Mara toward the old harness. The alarms still pulsed red against the walls, but the violence had drained out of the moment and left something heavier behind. The taser remained aimed at his ribs. The syringe hung open in a technician's hand. Harlan stood several steps back, half hidden behind uniforms, watching the dog with a fear he could no longer disguise as authority. Ghost kept one shoulder pressed against Mara's leg and his eyes on Harlan, calm but unyielding, as if he understood that the next mistake would bury Daniel forever. Mara reached for the harness, but she did not cut it open in the hallway. That was what Harlan wanted to accuse her of. Panic. Contamination. A nurse destroying classified material. Instead, the hospital commander ordered a security hold, and 2 military police sealed the corridor while a forensic technician brought a government laptop from the evidence office. Chain of custody forms appeared beside blood pressure cuffs and trauma gloves. The world felt absurdly ordinary for a second. Paper clips, badge scans, plastic bags. While Ghost stood over the gear like a sentry guarding a battlefield only he could see. The technician photographed the swollen seam before touching it. He logged Daniel's burn tag, Ghost's secondary chip scan, and the false transport label naming him Rex. Mara watched every step because she had spent 4 years trusting official steps. And official steps had carried her brother into a lie. When the seam opened under sterile scissors, Ghost lowered his head and exhaled against her wrist. Inside the padding was a packet wrapped in surgical tape. Waterproof plastic. and a strip of tan uniform cloth stained dark at one corner. A micro drive slid into the evidence tray without a sound. Harlan stepped forward then, voice hardening into procedure. He demanded the packet be secured under operational classification and removed from the public hospital system. The commander did not hand it to him. The technician inserted the drive into an encrypted reader attached to the government laptop, not the trauma monitor. And the screen stayed black long enough for everyone to feel the weight of locked history. A progress bar crawled through decryption. Error warnings flashed. Fragmented files appeared, disappeared, then arranged themselves by date. One folder carried Daniel Ellison's service number. Another carried Jonah Vale's. Marked pending witness transfer review. Mara felt the earlier intake alert return like a hand on her shoulder. Jonah was not a random crash victim dragged through the story by chance. His name was already inside Daniel's hidden evidence. The security flag, the private intake, the request to keep him off the public log. All of it had meaning, now. Down the hall, surgeons were fighting to keep him alive, while the only other witness stood on 4 legs beside a nurse no one had bothered to respect. The first video opened without sound. Kandahar dust filled the screen in pale green bursts and static. Then the audio caught up. Damaged, but clear enough. Daniel moved through the frame with Ghost tight at his knee. Both of them stopping before a compound gate where a pressure wire glimmered beneath trash. The next file showed crates labeled medical optics. But the inventory tags belonged to weapons guidance parts. Daniel raised a hand, and the camera turned toward Harlan's transport down the road. Coordinates shifted on the mission overlay. Extraction changed. Daniel argued through static. And Jonah's voice answered from another angle, confirming the contraband, confirming the altered route, confirming they had found something. Command, wanted, buried. The official ambush began only after that. Gunfire shredded the image. Ghost pulled Daniel behind a broken truck, teeth locked on his vest, refusing to leave even when rounds struck the wall above them. Daniel was bleeding but alive. He opened the left side of Ghost's harness with hands slick in dust and blood, pushed the micro drive into the lining, and pressed the burn tag beneath it like a scent marker. Then he bent close to Ghost's ear. The camera caught the same rhythm Mara had spoken in the corridor. A private release. A way home from the war. The final fragment made even the armed men lower their eyes. Harlan's transport lights appeared at the edge of the courtyard. Close enough to see Daniel crawling. Close enough to hear Jonah calling for pickup. The vehicle stopped. Harlan looked toward the smoke. Then away. He did not send rescue. He ordered the route closed and left the team behind while Ghost stayed pressed over Daniel's body until the blast washed the screen white. When the video ended, no one in the corridor needed Mara to explain why. Ghost had hated Harlan's scent. The dog had remembered betrayal perfectly alone. Harlan reached for the only weapons left to him. Classification. Chain of command. The practiced language of national security. The hospital commander cut him off by ordering duplicate copies made under evidence protocol. The technician logged them in front of witnesses. A military police captain secured Harlan's sidearm and badge before he could step nearer the laptop. Ghost rose at the movement. He did not snarl. He simply placed his body across the exit. Broad chest low. Eyes steady. A living barrier between the man who had rewritten the past and the hallway where Jonah was still fighting for breath. Mara stood behind Ghost with Daniel's tag in her palm and the false file open at her feet. The red stamps no longer looked official. They looked desperate. Every bite report. Every renamed form. Every rush toward euthanasia had been part of the same erasure. And now the erasure had a face. People stepped away from Harlan one by one. Not because Mara had shouted, not because rank had shifted, but because a condemned K9 had done what the men had failed to do. He had carried the truth home and pointed to the hand that tried to kill it. By sunrise, Walter Reed Annex no longer felt like a hospital recovering from a dangerous animal incident. It felt like a military crime scene waking up under fluorescent light. The euthanasia cart was rolled away, untouched. Its silver tray covered as if the hospital itself was ashamed of what had almost happened there. Investigators sealed the corridor where Ghost had blocked Harlan, photographed the bent kennel latch, logged the false Rex file, and placed Daniel's burned dog tag beside the old harness in separate evidence bags. Ghost did not understand forms, seals, or chain of custody, but he understood guarding. He stayed beside Mara through every step, head low, body between her and the doors, watching each hand that reached for the gear Daniel had died to protect. In surgery, Jonah Vale survived the first night. He woke near noon with a tube in his throat, one arm bandaged from wrist to shoulder, and Ghost lying on the floor below his bed. When Jonah's fingers finally moved, they found the torn edge of Ghost's ear. The dog gave one shudder, deep and silent, and pressed closer to the bedrail. No one in that room mistook it for obedience. It was recognition. Jonah's first written statement came hours later. Shaky and incomplete, but enough to match the files from Daniel's drive. He confirmed the altered extraction route, the contraband crates, and Harlan's order to abandon the courtyard after Daniel reported what he had found. By evening, the story that had buried Daniel for 4 years began to collapse. The evidence did not arrive as one dramatic blow. It arrived the way truth often does in the military. Through timestamps, copied drives, recovered audio, KIP scans, witness signatures, and the slow reversal of language that once seemed final. Rex was removed from the record. Ghost was restored. The bite reports were reclassified as provoked protective responses. The euthanasia order was suspended, then voided, then preserved as evidence of an attempt to destroy a living witness. Harlan tried to hide behind classification until the end. But classification could not cover forged medical logs, erased kennel entries, falsified K9 identity records, and an unauthorized destruction order issued 17 minutes after Ghost's old chip was discovered. 2 days later, military police escorted Harlan through the same corridor where he had planned to erase the dog. His uniform was still pressed. His face was still controlled. But the people watching him no longer stepped aside with respect. They stepped aside because the investigation had already done what rank could not stop. Mara watched from the nurse's station with Ghost at her knee and Daniel's coat across her shoulders. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired in a way sleep would not fix. For weeks, she answered questions in conference rooms with sealed blinds and coffee cooling beside thick folders. Officials asked why she had opened a restricted file, why she had crossed the yellow line, why she had interfered with a disposal order. Mara answered without raising her voice. She had followed a chip number. She had recognized a scar. She had listened when a K9 remembered what people had tried to bury. Ghost stayed under every table during those interviews, his muzzle resting on her shoe. When folders snapped shut too loudly, his ears lifted. When voices sharpened, his body rose. Slowly. Even the investigators stopped calling that aggression. They began calling it trauma. The formal review came 6 weeks later. Ghost's full service record filled a screen that had once held only red warnings. Mission after mission returned to him. Explosives found before a patrol entered a compound. A wounded corpsman dragged behind cover. Daniel pulled from gunfire. Jonah marked as a surviving witness. Citations that had been buried under a false death entry. The board declared Ghost a retired SEAL K-9, combat survivor, and protected military witness. Daniel's citation was restored afterward, not as a favor to grieving family, but because the evidence forced honor back where dishonor had been written. The memorial was held on a clear morning near the base chapel. Mara walked in wearing Daniel's field coat. With Ghost beside her on a loose lead, he did not need. The room was full of uniforms, polished shoes, folded programs, and men who had once believed a clean file more than a living animal. At the front stood Daniel's photograph, his folded flag, and a new collar engraved with both names, Ghost and Daniel Ellison, partners. When the restored final audio played, Mara heard her brother without static for the first time in 4 years. He had trusted Ghost to carry the proof, but he had trusted Mara to believe the impossible. That was when her control finally broke. Ghost rose, crossed the space without command, and laid his head against her chest as if Daniel had sent him there too. Months later, the ocean wind moved through Mara's small Virginia house before dawn. Ghost slept at the foot of her bed with Daniel's coat beneath his chin. No muzzle, no steel leash, no warning placard. When the gate clicked outside, his ears lifted, but his body stayed calm. Mara placed Daniel's dog tag beside Ghost's retirement certificate, and the old K-9 touched it gently with his nose before settling again. He had carried the truth through fire, false names, and years of fear. Now the war name could rest.